it all from start to finish to fine-tune your bike. I'm sure there's an order that we go in, right?
You always want to get the spring rate correct for the size of the rider, type of motorcycle, for the motorcycle. That's by far the most important thing. So if you're a 180-pound guy, you go buy a motorbike or you buy a KTM or whatever, you're probably going to be fine. The spring rate's probably going to be fine for you. You can tune it, and in today's world, a lot of the suspension components are great. Probably make the bike work really, really well. If you're over 200 pounds or you're under 150 pounds, you're going to have to make some spring changes for sure. Set the chassis so you get a proper sag so the bike works the way it's supposed to. Fine tuning comes with valving and with oil levels and some other minor things you can do.
But say before that, before you get to that point, you want to exhaust all your options, right?
So yes, you want to go out and ride the bike with the proper spring rates, with the components working properly, with the fresh oils, good bushings, good seals, everything working the way it's supposed to work with the proper spring rate. And then go out and test with that, ride with that, get comfortable with that. And then if you want to make some changes like, oh, I want this thing to be a little softer, I want to be a little more compliant, a little plusher, then there are things you can do to accomplish that. But getting the motorcycle to work right, correctly, proper spring rates with the components in good working order. Most important thing.
So, but what I'm wondering is when you go out, say you get a new bike, the spring rate's fine, you check your sag, all that's good. You're coming out here, are you going to first start with compression and get your compression right, and then go move to rebound and then get your rebound right?
So not necessarily is it ever right. So today you'd come out here, it's hard, it's dry, it's slippery. You're going to want to run your suspension softer,
right,
to get it to track better, to get it to handle better, to get it work better in these conditions. You come out here one day and it rained and it's perfect and it's loamy and it's plenty of traction, you're going to run your suspension stiffer. So you want to use those adjusters for conditions,
right,
not necessarily to make it better for those conditions, but you got to kind of know what you're looking for and what you're comfortable with, but you don't be afraid to just try things. Don't be afraid to open your high-speed adjuster and go run around for 15 minutes through a rough section, come back, take your high speed all the way soft or all the way hard, and go do that same section again and come back and ride it. And then you'll be like, oh, that's what that does. And you get a feel for it. And do those things in increments and one at a time. And when you make an adjustment, when you make a clicker change, you gotta be 3 or 4 clicks. You're not gonna feel one click. You're not. Maybe on a rebound adjuster if it's super tight. Another thing you wanna do, take into consideration, is adjusters, the further they're in to tight, the more sensitive they are. So the more of a change they make. When you get an adjuster out 18, 20 clicks, and you take it out to 24 clicks, you're never gonna feel that. But if you've got it in at 8 clicks and you run it into 6 or 4, you're going to feel that. It's going to make a bigger change. So you want to take that into consideration also.
Now, are there different makes that are more sensitive? I know, like if you have like a CRF or one of those older 250s, the air-cooled Hondas, you can like basically lock up that shock if you turn that thing all the way.
So some rebound adjusters, make huge changes. Compression adjusters don't. They open and close an orifice, and you're letting more oil flow back and forth. That's all you're doing. Rebound adjuster, actually, at the end of the shaft, of the shock shaft, there's a hole, and then there's a needle that opens and closes that. And you can crank that thing down and make all the oil flow through the valving. So it's not flowing through that bleed at all. It makes a big difference, makes it almost want to lock up the shock in some cases, if you have a whole bunch of valving on a shock. So rebound adjusters, yes. If you crank it in too far, it will make the bike freaking terrible. It'll make it, one doesn't want to move. But that's the only one that's really going to do that.
Okay, now fork oil level and viscosity. Now, I know there's different brands have different viscosities for the same number.
Sure.
And I know online there's a chart that kind of gives you like where they're at. So
right.
You have an idea if you're going to go a different brand.
Sure.
But now, because you were talking earlier on fork level height, on how the newer bikes now are more sensitive, Now, what year did that start, and what do people have to look out for exactly like how sensitive that oil level is versus the older bikes? Like,
So that oil level is a tuning tool, and any twin chamber fork is going to have a big, well, even open cartridge forks are going to have a big change with oil level changes. So it's something that you can do and not spend a lot of money. And if you know, hey, I want to make my forks a little softer, you can take 20 cc's or 10 cc's at a time out of them. And if you get the oil level too low, you're going to bottom. You're going to feel a bottom. You're going to feel a harsh bottom. If you took too much fluid out, that's what's going to happen. You're going to feel a bottoming. So, like on a new 49 millimeter Showa fork on all the Hondas, all the Cowies, or even the Yamahas with their KYB fork, there's about a 50 cc variance there. So anywhere from 320 to 370 on the Honda and the Cowie fork, and on the KYB fork, anywhere from guys are running 320 to 350, 360. So that outer oil level is a really good tuning tool, and it's really inexpensive to do.
now, are you talking cc's in the fork?
cc's, so 300, so that's the outer chamber.
Okay.
So that's the amount of fluid you pour into the fork after you've assembled it, and everything's back together again. That's the outer fluid in that outer chamber.
Okay.
There's oil in the inner chamber also, but that oil stays isolated. It stays with a twin chamber fork. That's the whole idea, is the dampening, all the dampening oil stays within a cartridge assembly. And that cartridge assembly is just this big, long shock absorber is all that is. And so that oil is isolated. It doesn't get dirt from the seal. It doesn't get spring rub. It doesn't get contaminated as if it was like back in the day, and it wasn't that long ago, where it was an open cartridge fork, whereas the spring and the cartridge and all the dampening is all utilizing the same oil. So twin chamber forks definitely are the staple today, and that's what everybody does. And that outer oil level is a great tuning tool. You're not spending a lot of money.
Yeah. Now, how about for say like the older bikes that have just the I forget what you call that type of fork, but you know how the older type
So an older fork would be an open cartridge fork.
Open cartridge, but doesn't have the shim stacks or the. Is that correct? Where it just got holes drilled in?
Okay, so that's a dampening rod fork.
Yeah,
so that's even different. And the only way you can really make a dampening rod fork work halfway decent is Racetech and some other companies sell a thing called an emulator. And what you do is you end up putting that valve on top of the dampening rod. You override, you drill out the compression holes on the rod, and the cartridge does all the dampening, all the compression dampening work. So there is a way to make a dampening rod fork work fairly well, but you got to spend some money on those emulators to make them work.
Now, what about with the bleeders? We were talking about the bleeders earlier. You want to bleed your forks regularly with that air screw
Right.
on the top.
Right.
They do make the push button.
They're fine, but they're junky. Right. So when they go away and they start to leak, take them and throw them in the trash and put another set on there. Don't try and fix them. Don't try and, if they start weeping or start making a mess, or they're just little Chinese, and they're great until they go away.
Are better than others?
No, because they're all being made in China or Taiwan or wherever now. So no, the shorter ones are better, because the taller ones, if you get a really tall one and you get out of the desert somewhere and crash, that big old thing sticking up, it's going to get ripped off, and then you got a problem. So the shorter ones are better, and when they do go away, and they will, just throw them in the trash. You can force them, yeah. So this one you really can't. And then, like I said, there's two screws on here. One's a bleed screw, and this screw is access to that little bladder. And so you need a needle and you need a pump, but you can actually change the internal pressure inside the cartridge, and it's pretty cool. So this is a very cool fork.
Will it change height or just?
No, it'll just change its stiffness. So it'll just be a little bit firmer feel to it if you were to put more air in it. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, I think these guys probably work.
Yeah, use a screwdriver.
I think it's a fork.
He just is bleeding.
Yeah, let's see if we can get.
I'll leave them right here. This fork.
Yeah, these are too tight. So yeah, no, there wasn't much in there at all.
Oh, you just want to let the air out. And not too tight, just kind of.
Yeah, just kind of snug. You don't want to get them too tight. There you go.
Anything else?
So, yeah, so if
run these stops and then go back, read online, figure out what the range is.
yeah, so let's see where they're at right now. 1, 2, 3.
So one is a rebound, one is a compression on this. Is one fork.
This is compression up here. The rebound on this fork's down below. So these are open pretty far. I'm gonna put them at 16. That's kind of in the middle. They have 30 clicks or 32, and you just kind of start there. But you know, not really. So if anything, you know,
One more turn on that.
one more turn on that will help. And then, you know, like I was saying before with the other guys, any of the PDS bikes, non-linkage motorcycles, a progressive spring is going to make a big difference. That's a straight round spring that's on
If
there.
it was progressive, you'd see it tighten
Right, you'd
up a
see
little
it.
bit.
You're right. It'd be a tighter section to it. Yeah, not a lot. There's about this much of tighter section, but it's softer, so it absorbs that little choppy, square, edgy, nasty stuff to begin with, and then it's just going to give it a more progressive feel.
Cool.
So,
Good to know. Thank you.
all
man. I
right, sure.
appreciate it.
A lot of people have. I get a lot of questions from people asking about bladder kits. A lot of you guys who ride KTM's have what they call an internal floating piston, which is the separating valve between nitrogen and oil on your shock. So this is off a newer bike, off a new WP shock. But just to give you guys an idea, you can push. Right now, there's no pressure. It's just ambient pressure. You can push on it. You can feel what the effort it takes to push that with, and then you can push the bladder, and you can just see the difference. So if there's another one improvement that you can make to a WP shock that makes a noticeable difference, it's about $200, is a bladder kit on WP shocks. So a lot of people will say, oh no, it's there, you can't tell the difference. Well, you can. You can just go like this and go like this, and you can feel the difference. So, and where you really notice it is choppy, square edgy, rocky stuff, because when the shock absorber, when the wheel hits something and the shock absorber's got to move, the valving on all these bikes can't blow open fast enough. So if it doesn't blow open fast enough, then the wheel kicks. Doesn't absorb it, the wheel kicks. If you put a bladder kit on there, then the oil that transfers from the shock to the bladder, and you have your high-speed adjuster open, then it will allow the shock to move and the wheel won't kick. So it's one of those things you can do that makes a difference. A couple $100. Something that, you know, I like to recommend stuff that guys can really feel a difference. You know, and there's a lot of little things you can do that make minor differences. You know, valving changes, but average guy's not going to notice the difference. So all of them. Everybody sells bladder kits pretty much, but. Yeah, there's probably, I think there is one on there. But it's something that you can do that's going to be really noticeable.
What year did they switch over to though? Or is that's the shock if you switch the rear shock? Is that what you're saying?
So all the WP shocks, even the old ones, you can put bladder kits in. So anywhere from 2000 to today, these are off 24s, but anywhere, you know, there's bladder kits available for all the WP shocks. And if it's non-linkage, a progressive spring and a bladder kit are the two best things you can do. And fresh fluid, the best things you can do to a shock to make it work.
Do you have a business card or something?
Yeah, there's some here somewhere.
Thanks so much for taking a look at my bike.
Yeah, sure.
Appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, Gerald. Yeah.
You want to check this one?
Yeah. Can you put it up there first?
Yeah, can you? All right. Looks like we've done a bunch of work to this one.
Yeah, spring chicken.
Yeah, you got those up pretty high there. Whoa. Yeah, right there. I just gotta come back just a little bit.
Yeah.
There it goes.
I put actually a softer screw in there. Yeah, it's a little loose. It could fall off.
Chain also is a big, too tight of a chain will make your rear end work badly also. So, you know, 3 fingers or whatever at the end of the chain rubber usually is a good spot. Yeah, yeah, and everybody's a little different. This is, but you know, somewhere around here. It's just like if you need like a quick reference or whatever. Okay, so that's low. Hop up on there. See what it's at. Okay, bounce. Yeah, go ahead and sit down. Okay, so we're way, way, way low. Your back end's way too low. Here, let's just put it on the stand. And there again, that's pretty tight too. Hopefully this guy will want to move for us a little bit. Can you just hold that right there for me? Thank you. We don't have to be all the way off the ground. Okay, so that was super loose.
Probably a couple turns at least.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be 2 or 3 for sure.
It's supposed to be like 105 or something.
110, 112 at the most. We're running a little bit on the low side, and see what you think of that. Let's see where that's at. Okay, that's good. Okay, that's better. Okay, hop up on there for me. Okay, go ahead and stand up. All right, now go ahead and sit back down. Okay, put your foot on the peg like you're riding it. Okay, hop back off again. Just tighten it up a little more. See what that did. Okay, hop up on here. Okay, go ahead and stand up. Okay, go ahead and sit back down. Yeah, it's still a little low, but you had it so, was there a reason why you had it really low?
No, I never did it right, I guess.
Okay.
Since I, yeah.
So it was super, super loose. Are you, I mean, not necessarily do you have to run 110 millimeters, you can run more.
Okay.
If you're the kind of guy that stands up and rides around and just cruises and that kind of thing, it's okay.
Yeah.
As soon as you want to turn it though, the front is going to want to push. It's not going to want to steer very well.
Okay.
So that's kind of the drawback to running your sag really, really low.
So it's okay now, a little better?
It's much, much better.
Okay.
So try that, because we don't want to make a huge change from what you had before.
Okay.
So try this, ride around a little bit, see what you think of that.
Okay.
And then if you feel like, oh, I can tighten this up, I like want even more,
yeah,
then we can tighten up even more. But try it like that first.
Okay. When he was talking about the dual cartridge oil, how do you have to change the oil inside the isolated cartridge?
Sure. So you don't have to change it as much. So like when somebody brings a set of forks in and they want a set of fork seals and they want to rebuild, we change all the oil. We change the inner cartridge oil and we change the outer oil, dump all that out and change what everything's worn out, put new seals in it and put them back together again. If you're just doing, if your bike has 20 hours on it and you're trying to change the springs and you're just doing a tune or something, you don't have to change that oil in that cartridge. So long as you can take the dampening rod on the cartridge, push it all the way in, and that rod comes out all by itself, and it has good pressure against it, they're fine. So probably 40 hours, you want to do the inner cartridge oil. And on a shock, you want to do the shock oil. But the outer oil in a fork, if you're just doing some tuning or you're doing some messing around or trying, different height in that outer oil, you don't have to do the cartridge oil. The cartridge oil is fine.
What about shock oil viscosities? Do you always run 2-weight?
So the lighter the oil, the better, in my opinion. You put more valving against it to get more dampening, because if you run a thicker oil, it's going to get hotter faster and it's going to fade faster. So in today's world, all those guys are running as light a fluid as they can. They may have to run a little more valving to get control, but you don't get the heat in the shock as much. So you don't get the fade out of the oil. You already have thin oil. It's not going to thin out as much. So if you stick a 10 weight in there, you get it hot, it's going to fade, and then you're going to get a pogo stick. You put a 5 weight or 2.5 weight, you go same ride, and you're going to notice the fade's not nearly as noticeable.
So my front forks on my RMX, the chrome is starting to fade away from it. Are there companies that re-chrome these, or do you have to just buy a lower?
Yeah, chrome's gotten really expensive. So you can get them re-chromed. It's gotten very expensive. You're better off, and it's a crapshoot, but you're better off getting on eBay and buy a set of forks, and hopefully those tubes are in good shape. I mean, that's what I do. I do that a lot. I'll see a good set of forks for $200, and I'll just buy them, so I have those parts. Because people will bring me a set of things where the chrome's starting to wear, or they hit a big old rock and scratch the snot out of it, you need to replace that tube. And you can buy, like KYB, you can buy tubes, and WP, you can buy tubes. Showa, it's tough to get parts for. So depends on, like Showa parts, if you wanted to get a tube for a Honda, you've got to go to the Honda dealer. You can't just go to Showa. Right. Whereas for KYB, I can go to KYB and buy parts, whereas you can't for Showa. I mean, you can for some parts, but it's not readily available like it is for KYB parts.
Is there a big price difference then?
No, yeah, well, if you buy it from the dealer's going to want to make his 30% or whatever he's going to make, so sure, it's going to be much more expensive. When you buy them from the distributor, they're less expensive for sure.
Donny, when you trailer a bike or just carry it, what about the compression on your forks for travel or anything? Is there a big problem with that?
No, and so springs today are made, they call it pre-sacked. So back in the day, 20, 30 years ago, springs would sack out. They would collapse after a while. They'd lose their tension. Today they don't do it. They have a way of producing the spring to where the sack is built into the spring. They shot peen them. They do. I'm not quite sure. I'm not an engineer, so I'm not sure how they get away with it or how they do it. But today's spring, so you can tie a bike down and you're not going to sack out the springs. So if you tie a bike down and your seals leak, it's not, you didn't do that by tying the bike down. That's just telling your seals were about worn out and they're ready to go.
Okay.
It just forces it to leak.
You don't want to winch it down.
No, you don't want to winch them down, but you don't also, it's not going to hurt the fork or hurt the spring being tied down.
So having a fork saver is pretty much...
Well, the fork saver keeps the wheel from turning. So like if it's in the back of your truck and the wheel turns, it's going to want to move. If you have the fork saver in there, the wheel stays straight.
I thought it was just to keep it from...
So old school, yes. 20 years ago, yes, it made a difference.
2x4.
Today, it doesn't make a difference. Not in the spring, not springs today.
So I'm trailering bikes and I pull down on those, but just not too tight, and I'm good for...
You're fine.
You're good.
You're fine. If it's a modern motorcycle, yes. If it's a bike from the 90s or the 80s, no. they'll go away. But springs today are built to not sack out. Yeah, even a conventional fork, if it's a newer conventional fork, it's fine. If it's an older one, from the 80s or 90s, probably not.
All different stuff.
Yeah.
What about the coatings that you can get on the forks, like the black coating and the...
So DLC coating on the lower tubes works great. It's fairly expensive. It's delicate. The blue stuff you see, the nitrate coating, is even more delicate. So
that's a rich man's game.
rich man's game, works great. If you're going to any coating, in my opinion, a Kashima coating on your top tubes works the best, or on a shock body, but it has to go to Japan to be done, I think. I don't think anywhere in the United States you can get it done. So all the stuff I've ever had Kashima coated, I send to a guy in LA, and then they send it to Japan.
And that makes a bigger difference?
It makes a noticeable difference. And the cool thing about that is you can run a stiffer fork with those coatings, and they're so slippery, they slide better, so you can end up running a stiffer setting and still have a plusher feel to the fork. So that's why all those Supercross guys, all those professional guys run those coatings, because they got a whole bunch of valving and some stiff, solid stuff that they're running, and they keep some plushness in the fork with the coatings. It helps. It helps a lot.
What about just the foundation, getting your forks aligned after you do your front brake or do a tire? Or
Super important. So the fork on the brake side needs to be aligned. The fork with the brake and the caliper, it can't be out of alignment. The other fork can be way out of alignment. So what you want to double check on that is, I tell everybody, put their bike together, put it up on a stand, loosen those 2 pinch bolts, take a little slotted screwdriver and you stick it in the little opening and you open it up a little bit, grab that fork leg, and you'll be able to move that fork leg a half an inch in both directions. Pull it in and let it find its happy spot, pull your screwdriver out and tighten your bolts down, and you know you're straight. 99% of the time, the axle will be flush with the fork leg. If your axle's sticking out, you know you got your fork leg in a bind and it's pushed in. And a lot of times too, if you go to push your forks and it feels harsh and then it drops through, it's not 90% of the time you got a misalignment. So it's real stiff, and then it goes through.
Okay.
That's normally kind of telling you something's not lined up right.
So that's the technique that you use most times?
So yeah, if it's a new bike and the axle's clean and everything's clean, you can push it in and out with your hand, and you can grab it with your hand and move it. But if it's an older bike and it's got beat up and the axle's kind of beat up, a lot of times I'll take it and take Scotch-Brite and clean the lug on the axle and clean the inside. Sometimes you have to even grind the axle a little bit because it's all beat up and it's got a lip on it. But you want to get that so it freely through the fork leg, so you can push it through there freely and not have it bind. There's a lot of information out there, and you just have to take it with a grain of salt. Some of it's great, and